With it being the 3rd-year anniversary of Mila's passing, I thought today would be a good time to do my video testimonial for the website. So I'm going to share it in all of the places so you guys can see it however you want to. I am being a little quiet because Grayson is asleep in the next room. But I wanted to go ahead and do this for you guys because how can I expect other people to want to reach out and do it themselves if I haven't done it first? So basically anybody who wants to put in a video testimonial can do it however they want to do it. They don't have to do it this way. It can be however and whatever you want to share. I'm going to start at the beginning and just kind of play through it a little bit. You guys probably read the blog entry that I wrote about kind of how that went, but it's still a little different from talking about it in person. So I'll just start. Mila we'd went on a walk and she wasn't really hungry. She wouldn't eat dinner that night and she was still herself, but she just was relaxing on our walk and she fell asleep that night. And I remember sitting on the porch and texting people back for a minute, taking a break, just sitting there because you know how mom life can be. And it had been like a really pretty summer day, so we'd played outside all day long and I was just like catching my breath before we went inside and I put her in the bed. Well, that happened. We were asleep and I woke up about 3 a.m. hearing her kind of whining in the living room, and her father had gotten home and was up with her, but when I walked in the room, he had said that she had thrown up everywhere and that she wasn't feeling good, and so she kind of started with stomach virus symptoms. She had never had a stomach virus before, and so that's just what we assumed it was. Well, after another day or so of feeling really sick, I had already sat in the bathtub with her to break her fever, cold water in the shower, and just everything that you do to get your kids' fever down, to help them feel better. I ended up texting her pediatrician, and she called in some Phenergan. At that point, she'd started to get a rash, and that was a time in the year when hand, foot, and mouth disease was going around a lot, and so it was just assumed that that's what it was, and it was viral, and it would have to run its course. She would get Phenergan to help with the vomiting, and that if she wasn't better the next day, then I would bring her in. And so it was another rough day. The Phenergan helped a little, but she was throwing up everything that she ate. And I was just exhausted and hadn't slept in days. And by the time that the night came that she got really sick, she had been on the couch with me all day. We'd been watching movies and stuff, and I had just been like laying with her. I remember saying, "I'm so sorry that you feel bad." And she said, "It's okay, Mommy." And she'd been throwing up constantly, and the only rest she got was little naps in between. So at that point, we were able to keep water or juice down some, and that night she wanted to sleep on her bed, and her father laid with her and they were watching a movie, and she never slept in her bed. She always slept with me. So I made sure that she came back to the bedroom with me before I went to bed, thankfully, because that was the night that she had her first seizure. And it was really her only seizure ever. I remember we had both fallen asleep a couple times, and I would wake up to her kind of restless, and at one point she was like up on her knees and like patting at the headboard. And that happened a couple times, and it kind of freaked me out, but I thought she was just having a weird dream because she hadn't slept in so long, that she hadn't been getting really good sleep, that she was just restless. And about the third time that she woke up, she began seizing, and I woke her father up, and he called 911, and her uncle was getting up to go to school that morning, and so he came in and checked and helped me hold her still while she finished seizing. And so I picked her up after that and just held her until the ambulance came. They ended up having, I guess it was the fire department, they came first with stuff to take her vitals. So I held her on the couch while they took her vitals. And I picked her back up when the ambulance got there and started taking her outside to the ambulance. And I got in the back of the ambulance with her and rode on to the hospital. About halfway there, they changed the code coming into the hospital, and I had been holding her oxygen for her during that time, and they had gotten an IV started, and I think they just kind of realized she was starting to get worse. And so when we got to the closest hospital, basically they checked her out. It was frantic. They were worried already, and the doctor told us that they think that she had meningitis and that they were going to send her to a hospital with a pediatric ICU. Now, I thought that I was going to get to ride in the helicopter ride over with her, and they ended up telling me that nobody could ride with her. And so I had to ride in a car and get there after her. So there was like this whole period of time where she was by herself, and I didn't want to believe things were as bad as what they were, but having a little bit of medical background, I knew that things weren't good. And I could tell how the doctors and nurses were acting, that things weren't good. And whenever we got there, we had some family that beat us there, and they had been waiting in the waiting room. Somebody had seen her come in through the emergency entrance, but nobody knew how she was doing. So whenever her doctor came to the waiting room after a long time to tell us anything, he pulled us out of the room and basically told us his name and that she wasn't going to survive it. That it was something that he had only seen a few times, and the type of meningitis that it was more rare, and that he had only had a couple, he had seen it 5 times, and he only had a couple people survive it, and they were up in their teenage years as far as children, and they still had deficits after surviving it. So basically, meningococcal meningitis can cause like the rotting of limbs, and can cause hearing loss and vision loss, and so a lot of people who do survive it end up with amputations, or end up losing one of their senses or more of their senses, or have brain damage. And with us thinking that it was a stomach virus and hand, foot, and mouth disease, it was already pretty severe with Mila, and so they were doing everything they could, but she was in a pediatric ICU room, and only 2 people at a time could go in, and I refused to leave, so only 1 person at a time was able to come in and see her. And at a certain point, when they confirmed it, they wouldn't let anybody that hadn't already been around her come in the room because they didn't want to spread it. The health department had to be involved because they were hoping that it wasn't going to be an outbreak, basically. And anybody that had been in contact with her in the past 10 days had to get a shot or a round of antibiotics so that they didn't spread it or they didn't get sick from it also. So at that point, I just sat in the room and held her hand and did everything that I could do and just be there while people came and visited her. And once things started turning and they thought she was brain dead, they wanted to start doing tests because they can't take somebody off of life support without certain tests being taken twice. And so the first round that they did them, they asked us to leave the room, and that was the first time I had left the room, and I had to quickly come running back because they pushed too much air into her lungs, and they popped them both. And so she had to have chest tubes that coated her. They had to bring her back, and from that point, I told them that they weren't going to do the second round of tests, that I wasn't okay with it, and so they decided to do a brain scan the next day. Now the brain scan came back and it was pretty obvious. There was a couple EKGs done and everything, and basically it was hard to tell until the brain scan, and they just kind of knew. We had to take her down to the brain scan, pumping air for her because she was on oxygen and depending on that because she had been intubated already. I remember sitting in the waiting room whenever they were doing the brain scan. We had to go all the way downstairs with them, and at that point I was basically like, I don't want to give up. I don't think that it's going to be deadly. I think she'll be like okay. I think if we just wait it out, she'll be fine. And I was trying to be very optimistic, and I don't know, just whenever we were back up and all the results were in and I'd seen her and everybody was basically coming in and telling her goodbye, I just knew that when the doctor asked the hard question and whenever her father asked me for my opinion, I knew that I couldn't keep her on life support any longer, that her body was frail, that she was having such a hard time and that she couldn't keep fighting like that she wasn't there anymore. It was just her little body. So I made the call and I told them that the next morning we could take her off the life support. So everybody got to say goodbye. Excuse me. Everybody got to say goodbye and they let me hold her. And I read her favorite book and sang her song. And after everybody could say goodbye, I wanted to be alone with her, so her father and I were the only ones in the room while she passed away. I had them place her in my lap. I had asked if I had a chair in the room so I could hold her before all of this because I just felt like she needed to be held. So they let me hold her while she passed. And after she passed away, they cleaned her up and they let us lay with her. And they let us spend the time between her passing and when the funeral home got there to spend with her and let us have that time so she could be with us instead of down in the morgue by herself, which I'm so thankful for that time with her. Truly, it was really nice to have it because you don't want to expect it. You don't want to let that happen, and it had to happen. So the night before she passed away, they had done a few handprints and footprints for us. The nurses were really great. I wasn't a fan of her doctor just because of the way that he went about things. There was a point before she passed away that he asked if they could do a spinal tap. They wanted to give her a spinal tap, and they had just coded her with popping both of her lungs. She had 2 new chest tubes. She had an IV in every place possible. And she wasn't in any position to have a spinal tap. I didn't feel like it was fair to keep putting her through it. And so I told him no. And I asked the nurse after he left if it was necessary right now. And it was basically just something that the health department wanted at that moment. So when I told him no, he was basically just like, well, then she's going to be a coroner's case, and left the room. So I wasn't a fan of him, and she wasn't a coroner's case. She didn't have to have an autopsy. The coroner came in right after she passed away and basically said that they could go ahead and give a spinal tap, that he didn't have to do an autopsy at all. So that made me feel a lot better because I don't know how I would have handled that. That's really hard to even think about. But the days after that, after she passed, my parents drove us home and we had to leave the hospital, obviously. And the house was mostly just how she had left it. Everybody had tried to clean up for us, but I didn't want any of her stuff touched. And I got very obsessive about keeping everything. Like, even the stuff from when she was sick, I kept. And I didn't want anybody to touch any of her stuff. I didn't let kids come over to the house anymore. I didn't let anybody touch anything that was hers. I had a really hard time. And while people were coming in and out, I barely talked to anybody. I kept to myself. I was completely zoned out because, I mean, at that point you're in shock. You don't know how to react. You don't really want to believe that it happened. The days that we were there, they felt so unreal. Like, it didn't feel like days had passed. And so we had to make plans. We had to make a funeral happen. I had to buy an outfit to wear to a funeral because I didn't even have one. Like, the last thing you want to do at that point is go to a store, and my mom had to take me shopping because I didn't have anything to wear for her funeral. We had to find what she wanted to be buried, what I wanted her buried in. And a couple of our friends drove several hours to get it because it was the only Disney store that had the dress that I wanted her to wear. And if you knew my little girl, she was in a Disney princess dress every day. So it was perfect. Everybody in our community and our families and our friends went above and beyond to help, and I could never thank those people enough. It was just insane. And in those days, I don't remember almost anybody that was at her funeral. I didn't look at anything but her. I didn't leave her sad. And I know I remember people bringing me things to eat and drink because I wouldn't. And then I remember the days after when people were bringing so much food to the house, and I probably ate a whole cake by myself every few days. Just the funeral food, and man, the weight gain from that was insane because you have to find comfort in something. And at that point, my comfort was food because, I mean, what are you supposed to do? So I kept myself really, really busy. And I started completely renovating the house that I lived in at the time. And I started writing in a journal every time I would go to the cemetery where she was buried. And I would just sit out there because at that point it was just a dirt pile. So I would just sit out there and I would write all of the days, how they happened, so I would never forget them. And I never needed to look back because I remember how I felt. I remember every single moment of all of those days. Like, I may not have outlined every single thing for you guys here, but I remember every single thing. And so I have a little journal that has all those days mapped out, and that was the first time I ever really started writing about her. And sorry guys, Grayson woke up, so he's gonna be coming in here. So basically, when Grayson was born is when I started blogging for the first time, but I'd already begun writing about her before all of that. And blogging just seemed like a really great way to talk it out because I wasn't willing in the beginning to talk to other people. So I would blog it, and that way I got it off my chest and I didn't have to talk directly to another person. And I really, really focused in on doing that for myself and to keep her memory alive. And that kind of started all of this, really, with the website and the book that I've written and every single thing, because I just want to honor her memory and her story. I just don't want her to be forgotten. And so I've worked really hard on all of these things. And I just wanted to share with you guys a little bit on the 3-year anniversary. And thank you guys for listening. I really appreciate it. And I did get emotional through some of it. I didn't know if I would or not. Sometimes I can talk about it completely detached and not let myself get that way. And today, I guess, was not the day for that because of it being the anniversary of her passing and everything. But thank you guys for hanging in there, and thank you for listening. And I hope that this inspires somebody else to tell their story or to tell something about what they've learned throughout that has helped them and made them stronger. Like I said, anybody that shares does not have to tell everything that happened. They don't have to outline it for anybody. Anything you want to share that you feel like you've learned or that has happened, just anything you think would help another mom is so impactful. Thank you so much for listening.